looking at UrbanCode and WebSphere. Today's webcast will be brought to you by Ranger 4, an IBM Premier Partner specializing in DevOps and an expert in application release automation and UrbanCode. Today's speaker will be Mark Roberts from IBM. If you have any questions, just enter them into the chat and we'll answer them at the end. For now, I'll pass you over to Mark.
Thank you, Tejinder. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar with IBM and Ranger 4. And as Tejinder says, my name is Mark Roberts, and I've been in the Rational brand within IBM Software Group now for about the last 15 years. And throughout most of that time, I've spent my time working on IBM's change, configuration, build, and now deployment products. So software build has been something that I've been involved with for many years, and now since the acquisition of UrbanCode by IBM in April 2013, I've found myself enjoying myself working with UrbanCode since that time. And it's really a nice extension from the build and configuration products that I've worked with in the past, moving things onwards slightly in the life cycle now and getting involved with how organizations deploy their software has been, an interesting extension of the software development life cycle. And it's allowed me to meet some different people and hit a number of different problems. And the problems that we find is that for many organizations, it's very difficult to create representative environments given the hardware constraints that people have, given the constraints on getting access to machines hosted in virtualized environments. And that makes it difficult for organizations to incrementally test changes. So the benefits that we have from agile development, and whether you describe yourself as agile with a capital A or not, many people are operating in small incremental pieces of change, and pushing those through the development cycle is working very well and getting those things built. But moving those into some representative sort of runtime environment can be quite difficult, and it presents a bottleneck within the development life cycle. It also presents a huge cost to organizations who choose to overcome this problem by buying more and more hardware. So what a lot of organizations have tried to do is to create their runtime environments and create the application server environments in more of a just-in-time approach. So taking bare servers that just have an operating system installed and then layering on middleware as and when required means that they can do a little bit more. They can make the decisions about what they test on much later. So if you choose that you want to test on a particular WebSphere application server platform, and you choose that you want to test on that without any fix pack supplied, or maybe with the latest IBM fix pack, then you can make that decision very late in the day and still benefit from getting things through the life cycle very quickly. So it all comes down to provisioning the environment, and cloud has become very important in this area. Many organizations are looking upon cloud environments as an elastic resource that they can use to extend the resource capacity that they have within the organization and start to use cloud environments. Many organizations are doing it for everything, for their entire development, for their entire product development. Some organizations are a little bit more conservative and are doing it for just elements of the applications that they feel they're happy to have out in a cloud environment, even though many clouds these days are very, very private and very isolated in their nature for a specific customer. And when they do that, really, when you're operating in clouds, what you want to do is have the minimum number of cloud images available in your library that you want to then work from. There's no point in having hundreds and hundreds of patterns in some cloud-based system that just clogging up space and becoming an administrative overhead of it on itself. So keeping that to a minimum, and again layering on the middleware and application servers and database servers and that sort of technology as and when you need it is quite beneficial. And one of the things I want to show to you today is I want to give you a quick introduction to the UrbanCode Deploy product as it stands. But then I want to show you some things about how we've created systems for deploying specific WebSphere application server technology from the ground up onto machines that have absolutely nothing on there already. And I've got this virtual machine running that you're looking at right now. I'm also using a different virtual machine, number 93 there, and you can ignore the other one that's running, and that's for some other things I'm doing today. So I'm just going to have a look, see if there's any questions in the chat window at the moment. Hopefully I'll be able to see these as they come through. I just want to keep an eye on them. And if you do have any questions, fire them into the chat window. If there's anything that's specific anybody wants to see today and you think we're not going to cover it, then just fire it in there now. In fact, I think I might need to select, I think I might need to copy and paste them into the window that I can see on there. But I'm sure that'll sort itself out. But if you do have any questions, fire them in as we go through. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to UrbanCode Deploy. It's a very, very simple application, actually. It's very easy to use. It's a delight to use, very easy to learn, and it's centered around a web interface. There is also a command line interface. There's a REST interface as well for the product if you want to automate the interaction with the product, maybe connecting it to a build system or connecting it to other third-party applications that you have. So you can drive that from a command line or from a REST interface. But for many people, the way they use the product is by this user interface we're looking at here, the web interface. And I've got a few tabs open. Let me just close a few of these here and tidy things up a little bit. And when you start off with UrbanCode Deploy, you start off with the notion of an application that you want to deploy. And for many people, this will be a business application that you're deploying, not what you see there now. This is some examples that I've created for deploying WebSphere application server in various different flavors. But coupled in within that, we also have the deployment of an application as well, and I'll be showing you that in a few minutes. And keeping an eye on the time, I'm going to show you this running. It's going to take around about 12 minutes to run, but I'm going to start it off running in the next couple of minutes, and then we can talk through what it's actually doing as it's doing it and show you it actually executing as it goes through. So we have the notion of an application, and that's something that you want to deploy. So that could be something like a mortgage system if you're operating a bank or a building society, and that might include web pages to promote it and provide information to people. It might include application servers that gather data from a customer when they apply and provide all of their relevant details for the application for a mortgage. There might be some business rules that are in there, some fraud detection software systems. So you start to see a number of different components coming out. And all those things that I've just listed out in my, straight off the top of my head in some sort of fictitious mortgage application, those are the components that make up the application. The other question that we always ask people when we start to think about UrbanCode Deploy and start to think about people using it is, what are the environments that you're going to go through? What is the route to production for your particular applications? You go through from development into QA, pre-production, production. We'll have people with different names for those environments as they go through things like user acceptance testing, customer acceptance testing, and so on. Those environments we capture within the application structure that you're going to see now. So as soon as I go into an application, we see the environment listed there, the first environment that we're going to work with. And I can create a whole host of new environments through here. I can give them all a nice color so they look a little bit different. And I might have one called pre-production. Oops. That color. And you can see how easy it is to build this up. Now, what is the difference really between development, QA, and pre-production? Well, the likelihood is that the difference there will be the resources that are used in those environments. So in a development environment, the likelihood is that we'll just have one server that we're connecting to. And that one server is likely to run an application server, a database server, host some HTML. That's all it's going to do. It's going to cover everything for us. We might have a number of those even. We might have development 1, development 2, and so on. When we get to QA, we might decide to split out the database server and the application server. When we get to pre-production, we'll have the same as QA, but we might introduce a load balancer here so that it matches more closely what we have in production. What we want to achieve with UrbanCode Deploy is consistency of the processes that we will use for the deployment. So we don't care in each environment where a component is going to get deployed to. We'll have a component called, for deploying a WAR file. We don't mind if it's going onto a server called Server 1 in the development environment or Server 7 in pre-production. We don't really mind. Similarly, SQL scripts, they might be executed on the same server as the application server in development, but the likelihood is they'll be executed on a different server in pre-production and production to the application server. And we segment those things out through the resources that each environment has. So if I go into development, the first thing that I see in here is a list of resources that have been allocated to this particular environment. And if I open this up, what I see is I've given it some nice hierarchical name going through my resources, it's a development machine, and its development work around WebSphere application server network deploy. We then see the list of machines that are available within that resource set. And in this instance, there's just the one. And if I open that up, we then start to see how the various different components that I've constructed my application from are mapped onto that particular application server. So in a hierarchy on here, the first thing that I'm going to install on there is the IBM Installation Manager. And then I'm going to use that to install WebSphere application server. And then on top of that, I'm going to put a fix pack. And I'm also going to install my JPet Store application. And some of you might have seen the Pet Store application in the past. It's kind of a bit of a silly story because it's pretty unlikely that you're actually going to be buying pets on a website. It's one of the few things that you don't find on Amazon, is puppies and fish and birds. I suspect it's kind of illegal to ship those things through the post to you anyway, but it's a fictitious application that we have on here. So you can start to see how we could create a structure on here where we have multiple machines to segregate that out and have our pet store database maybe installed on a different machine. And we have a full browser that we can use to look at all of the resources that we have and start to move things around and allocate different components to different machines within those different environments. And the likelihood is that we'll see our development environments being fairly simplistic, and then we'll see things grow and grow and grow and get more involved, more machines, more segmentation to the components and where they're placed as we move up through the environments towards production. So this is how we map the components to the resources, which separates out the actual components themselves and the applications from needing to know where they're actually going to be deployed. So let's go back into our application and have a look at what it's going to do. If I go into my application process, we see in here a number of processes that have been defined. There are different things that we need to do to our application. We might want to deploy the entire thing, which is what we have at the bottom one, and I'll show you in a second. We might also want to do some smaller incremental changes just to deploy the Pet Store app or just to deploy a new profile. And if we look at deploying the WebSphere ND and JPet Store application, that takes us into this nice graphical screen here where we can see the processes that we're going to go through to actually perform this deployment. And the process here at the application layer is really all about orchestration. This is about showing us the order of things that we're going to actually run. And the first thing we're going to do is install the IBM Installation Manager. That bootstraps the whole process. The next thing we're going to do is install WebSphere Application Server, Network Deploy. The next thing we're going to do is report on the version of WebSphere that's been installed. Before the fix pack is applied, we'll then apply the fix pack, and then we'll report again on the version number. Just if we want to, a bit of belt and braces here. People are always a little bit nervous and a little paranoid almost about the checking and checking and checking things. So we want to see what version of WebSphere we deploy. We want to then see what version we have after a fix pack's been applied, just to make sure things are okay. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to, after we've done the fix pack and checked it, we're going to install a profile, WebSphere application to a profile called default01. Then we'll install our Pet Store app, and we'll then install our database. Now, the database actually could be done in parallel to some of these operations. So what I could choose to do is reorder things a little bit. And this means now when I get to the end and the default process has been applied successfully, we'll then go and install the app and the database changes at the same time. And why not leave it like that today? So I'll now go up and save my process, and we'll come back and we'll run that in a second. So let's kick that off now, and I want to start that running. And as soon as I start to go back to my environment and hit the run button, select the process that we've just been looking at, and I then want to choose the versions that I want to deploy. And this is where you start to see some of the flexibility that's involved here, because I need an installation manager, I need WebSphere Application Server ND. I could stop there and just go and deploy my application and database if I wanted to, and skip the fix pack. Maybe I want to create a particular configuration without it. Maybe there's a brand new fix pack has just appeared. So I go into the list of fix packs that are available and pick a newer fix pack than we've previously used. We then start testing our application in that environment. I then want to look at the versions of the application I've got. Well, I've got 2 versions of that available to me. I'll start off just with the first one, and then I'll pick my 1.0 of my database. Now, you can wrap up that sort of configuration set there into what we call a snapshot. And a snapshot is really just a way of taking, effectively almost taking a photograph of that screen and saying, let's repeat this across all of our environments. And that would mean that whatever happens to our application, it might go on to 1.1, 1.2, 2.0, and so on and so on. If we deploy the snapshot that we take now of that configuration, no matter what happens to the application, it's going to be version 1.0 that gets deployed through those environments. So if I deploy this into dev today and I'm happy with it, I do some tests, I might think, great, that's going forward into QA. The last thing I want to do there is say, well, I've tested 1.0 of my application, so I'm going to move 1.7 into QA. Well, I haven't tested that yet in development, so that would be a bad idea. So snapshots allow me to put a big ring around a number of components at specific versions. And not only do we version all of the content that we deploy within UrbanCode Deploy itself, so it has its own binary repository of content, of artifacts that it stores within the product. We also version all of the properties that are defined. We also version all of the processes that we use. Now, that application process I showed you a few seconds ago, we versioned that. And all of the processes that we're going to have a look at in a second, the component processes, we version all of those as well. So let's start this running. Then I'm going to have a look to see if we have any questions. Actually, before I go from this screen, let me just show you this running. So here we are now monitoring a running process. The arrow in the running shows us what's currently running. And if we open this up and go and view the child processes, we can then see the detail of exactly what it's doing. And I'll talk you through this in a second, and then we'll come back and have a look at the actual process that does it. See if we've got any questions. No, I think we're okay. So this is rattling through quite nice and quickly. It's downloaded the artifacts from the repository store within UrbanCode Deploy, and then it's gone and replaced some tokens. Now, we do tokenized replacement to store variables within UrbanCode Deploy. One of the big things that we find with customers, and people I met yesterday had exactly the same situation, is that they will have a text file or some sort of XML file maybe that contains configuration information for each specific environment. And there are things within those text files that are specific to that environment, and there are things that are common as well. So if they change one of the common things, they have to change it in all 3 or 4 or 5 files. And what we try to do is abstract all of that information out and hide that information in UrbanCode Deploy. And the way we do that is with these tokens. So what you can see hopefully on screen now, hopefully it's coming through nice and clear for you, is that we've got at im_eclipse_location for this example, and it's got a value assigned to it there. So what we've done is we've taken one of our standard response files that's used in this installation process, and we've tokenized a lot of the values in there that would change. And that allows the teams to decide that when they deploy to this particular resource, they want it in this particular directory. So if we deploy into a machine where we've suddenly filled the hard disk and we want to put it onto an extended partition, well, we can do that. We just change the reference of where it's going to go on that specific resource. And what I want to do now, we'll go back and check the progress of the deployments, but I want to go back into the process in a second and show you some of this in the process itself. But let's go and see how we're doing. Well, 1.5 minutes into deploying WebSphere application server ND. So let's go and have a look at that process. It does some very similar things. And again, we're checking available disk space to see whether we've got enough room. So we obviously have, because it's carried on. We download the artifacts out of the store. That took us 1.5 minutes to do that. To download an entire WebSphere application server ND installation media set. And then we're going to replace some tokens. And there's quite a few tokens that we replace here. If you're familiar with WebSphere, what you'll be aware of is the features that you choose to install. So if we look at this one here, we've got features features at, and then we've selected here that we're going to install core features, thin client, embeddable containers, and so on. Let's go and have a look at that process now. So when we look at the component process that we're looking at here, we've got a lot more fine-grained detail to it, a lot more things we can do. And over on the left-hand side, we've got the palette of different operations that are available to us. And this palette is extendable. Excuse me a second, I'm just going to sneeze. It's not great having a cold, but at least the mute button means that you don't all have to join in. So if we look at the left-hand side, we have this palette of different features that are available to us for the different technologies. So if we go into the application servers and Java application servers and look at WebSphere deployment, we'll see a variety of things that we can do to WebSphere environments. So we can install applications, we can generate plugins, we can restart servers, start applications, and so on and so on. And some of those things we do a little bit later on when it comes to deploying the pet store application. But a lot of the things that we do in here are based around shell scripts, around executing shell commands. And that's a great sort of fallback condition to have for anything. If you can provide us with a command line for a particular operation you want to perform, then we can automate that with UrbanCode Deploy. It's as simple as that. And what we're doing is we're putting a wrapper around that that provides you with governance, control, audit, and a lot more control than you get if you execute it outside of the scope of a product like UrbanCode. So if we have a look at this replace tokens step, as soon as I go into a step, we start to see the details of it. And each step that we can choose from that left-hand side palette over there has different parameters available to it, and different information that you need to provide, and different things that are variables. So you've probably guessed already that the things with the little red asterisk are mandatory. You have to supply those. And the top one there, the second one down after the name, shows us an example of a property in UrbanCode Deploy. And we can store properties in a variety of different locations. Here we're showing a component property. So this property is defined for this particular WebSphere application server ND component, and it's the silent install file. So we've stored a reference to where the file is that contains the tokenized information that governs how the installation process will operate. And if we look at the tokenized section down here, we can see that our features word within the tokenized file is going to be replaced with something called resource/WebSphere ND features. So let me go and show you the resource properties that we have on a different tab for that particular resource. So down here we have our WebSphere ND resource. Go into the configuration for that and look at the resource properties. And here is where we store all of the properties. Now, some of the properties themselves, such as this one, refer to other properties. So the WebSphere ND installation base location is referenced from the IBM base location with /IBM/WebSphere ND on the end. And the IBM base location is the one at the top, which is just /opt. So if I change that from /opt to /ext, everything would suddenly move. because I'm using that as a base location that I'm basing other properties off. So we try to be as clever as we can with these properties to give ourselves the minimum number of changes that we need to make when we need to move something. If I change that to a different directory, once highlighted now, everything's just going to go over to somewhere else. And the one I was looking for there was features. So we had a property to go back and show you again. So we had WebSphere ND features within the resource area. So I'm looking at my resource, go and find WebSphere ND.features, and it's there. So you can then see the features substitution that will be made. So again, if I wanted to change the features that were installed on this particular resource, I would go and change it there. If I wanted to change the cell name or the node name, I would come in here and change them. But they're all audited in here. So they are going to be recorded, and changes to them are going to be recorded all within here. So it's a great way to parameterize what you're doing and to control the properties. Now we can make some of these properties environment specific as well. So where we have the word resource there, we can have environment. Let me show you an example of that. So let's go back to our progress and see how we're getting on. And looks like you might have finished. Oh, we have a failure. What was that? Fixpack seems to have failed. Well, if you do get failures, then you get this sort of information. And if you go down to the line that has failed and look at the output log, then you can see why it's failed. Running process has been detected. Okay, let me just go and fix that. So I cleaned everything down, but what I didn't do was kill off the running process. So there we go. Now let's go back up and kick that off again. I think we should still be okay for time. And a quick way to do this is I can just say latest for all, version 1.0 of the application, and submit that, and that's off. Okay. Got to tick something, 2 seconds. Right, now let's go and show you that component process that I was just talking about for our pet store application. Because here we've got some environment-specific properties that we're interested in. And in this one, we're deploying the actual application onto the WebSphere application server environment, and then we're going to go and start it. But one of the first things we do here is we expand the WAR file. And the reason why we do that is because we want to update a property file, which is a database connection in the WAR file that we're deploying. We want to make sure it's pointing at the right database for us. So if we go and have a look at this property, we're going to go and expand the jpetstore.war file. We're going to expand it into this location that's shown here. And then what we're going to do is go and update a property file. The property file that we're going to update is called database.properties. And we're going to update the URL in there that points to a particular database location. So here we've got a new scope variable for this particular parameter. This one shows environment/db_URL. And that means that for each of the environments that we create for our application, we have to define db.url and identify where it's pointing to. That means thereafter, when we're deploying, we don't have to suddenly think, oh, which parameter file do I need to select, you know, and what changes do I need to make? It's all defined behind the environment. So you can start to see where things that are environment specific, we set them in this way. Things that are resource specific, such as where I want to put my application server on a particular machine, we're going to put that one on a resource parameter. So let's go and have a look at our process that's running. So we're just installing WebSphere ND again now. We should be all right for time to get that done. So let's go and have a look where that property is. I'll keep that one open actually. Let's go and open this up in another window and have a look at that application environment. And if we go into our environment and look at the configuration, we can see that we have an environment property defined called db.url, and it's a particular JDBC connection to a database connection string. So that's defined within there. Now if we go to one of our other environments that I created a few seconds ago, that one doesn't have one. So I can add that in as a new property in here. I can make some of these properties mandatory, such that you can't deploy to a new environment until you've created them and until you've provided all of the information that's necessary to be provided. Once you have that, you can then start to compare the differences between different environments and start to say, well, what is the difference between dev and QA at the moment? And you'll start to see things like database connection strings being different. Let's go back to our process. So we expand the WAR file, we update the property file value, so our URL is set to the value that's been defined for our particular environment. We then update the WAR file, which is going to zip it back up and recreate jpetstore.war, the archive file. And then further down here, we're going to then go and stop the application running. This is one of the standard steps that we have defined for WebSphere application server, which is to stop an application. And again, I'm using a variable here called the WebSphere application server-app name. So you can create a parameter for that so that when you're stopping and starting, it becomes more of a generic process then that you can use, and you can copy and paste processes from one component to another, and then provided that you create this particular variable and give it the application's name, then you're home and dry. It's going to stop or start or whatever you want to do. Now I hid a number of hidden properties there. Let me open those up, and you can see down here that we need to identify the cell, the node, the server, the cluster, if we have one, the command path, username, password, host, and port. There's quite a lot of information there to provide, but again, if we're managing those from our resource properties, it means that if I'm talking to machine 15, then it will be the parameters that are relevant to that particular machine. If the next day I'm deploying for my test application onto machine 19 because 15 is being used for something else, it really doesn't matter. I will pick up the definitions of what the WebSphere ND cell name is on that particular new machine if I change machine partway through some work that I'm doing. So it makes things a little bit easier to deal with. The next thing we're going to do is install or update our application. So again, more different information to provide here, the context root, the application source, the application name, and so on. Some optional string parameters if we wanted to provide them there are available to us. And then we can start the application running. We can provide additional command line arguments if we want to, if that's the sort of thing that you would normally do at the command line. You still have that option to do that from within here. We also have things like post-processing scripts. So here we've got a few examples of them, things like validate the WebSphere version, is WebSphere profile installed. What those will do, they will run certain commands. They will gather the output of those commands. If you remember when that step failed a few minutes ago, we went and had a look at the output that would have scrolled up the screen had we been running this thing by hand. Have a look how we're doing. Still installing the fix pack. So we went and had a look at what would have scrolled up the screen. What you can do is you can go and grab that text and then you can run a script against it to go and look for certain words, certain characters, certain sequences, and then make decisions based on that and set either the success or failure of this particular step based on that. So if you've got some complex work you need to do on a particular application to decide whether or not it's been successfully installed, you have the opportunity to do that. Then we start the application running. So let's go and have a look how we're doing. Now, in the interest of time, that's going to go on and take a little bit more time to run. But let's see where we are. Let's drill into this one and have a look at where we are. So that's now installed in the fix pack. It took about a minute so far. The whole thing takes about 12 minutes to run. So in the interest of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the history, and I'm going to show you one of the prior successful ones that ran. And in here, so you can see everything's nice and green. We've created the profile as well, which is check whether a profile exists. Failure there is not necessarily a failure. What that means is that we've gone looking for a profile and we haven't found one. So if we don't find a profile, we're using a switch statement here to look for it being present. And if the value is no, we go and execute one thing. If the value was yes, we just go and start the server. So we then go and create the profile. We then start the server running, and we see that it's up and running, echoing out to the screen the things that you would typically expect to see when you start WebSphere servers. Then we go and install our JPEG store application, go into all the things that we've just talked through, and then we go and install our database. Now the database changes here actually are basically just running an upgrade DB script. And what that is doing is running a SQL script to apply some specific changes, to add some new tables, to initialize some data within those tables, and that puts all of the pets into our lovely and ethical pet store that we're running online. So let's just go and have a look how we're doing. Let's have a look at this one. So it's getting information about the fix pack. Just to show some of the reports we can get back, this one just wanted to get the version information before the fix pack was applied. So it's just run a version information command, and it shows us the features that we've installed, the version that we've installed, and that's all gone through neatly. It's done the same thing now after the fix pack was applied. And we've gone up to WebSphere ND 8551 instead of 8550. And it's now rattling through, creating the profile. Profile takes it a minute or two, but I'm going to have a look now and open things up a bit and see if we've got any questions. So, Tajinder, do we have any questions from anyone at the moment?
Hello. Yeah, Mark, we have one or two. One question is, what versions of WAS does UrbanCode support?
Right, well, we have a plugin that you've just been looking at for WebSphere Application Server. So if I go and show you the lists of plugins that we have over here, we have Application Deployment for WebSphere. And this is a great way to look at the commands that are available within each particular plugin, the list there of everything that it will do to a WebSphere environment. And if you look at this on the UrbanCode Deploy plugins website, if you just Google for UrbanCode Deploy plugins, you'll find them all. And on there it will tell you that we support back to WebSphere version 6.1. So hopefully folks on the call are not on WebSphere platforms before 6.1. I think most folks these days are on some on 6, most on 7, and some on 8. But we support back to version 6.1. That's what we've been tested against.
Okay, thanks. And another one is, what other tools in the WebSphere portfolio does UrbanCode support?
Right, the other tools in the WebSphere family, well, if I go back to this list of plugins, I may not have them all listed in here, but what we also support is, I've got a few of them here. We've got WebSphere Liberty, so we can do deployments to a Liberty platform. We can deploy Liberty itself in the same way that we deploy WebSphere Application Server. And that's a nice mixture where people use Liberty in development and QA and then move across to full WebSphere ND in production. We also support WebSphere MQ, so we can do deployments to MQ. I have some examples of that if anybody specifically wants to see those at a later time. If you could let us know. We also have WebSphere Message Broker, or IIB as it's now known. I have that one installed here. I'll show you that list. So we can deploy broker archives, we can set properties, we can start and stop message flows, we can set up execution group properties, we can create execution groups as well. I do that just off the command line interface to WebSphere Message Broker. So there's a lot of those other non-IBM technologies. The major ones that we support are things like JBoss, WebLogic. We have 5 new plugins available for WebLogic. Tomcat. In the Microsoft world, we support the Microsoft web application server as well. So there's a huge variety on there. But again, I'll just say if you want to know if a particular technology is covered, have a look at the plugin site on the website. I'll just go across there in a second. I think this deployment's now nearly finished. I'm just going to watch that finish. Any other questions to Jinder?
Yeah, it says, so apologies if it was mentioned, but regarding the environment comparison capabilities, i.e. differences between dev and UAT, for example, presumably those captures are just for the configuration of environments stored in UrbanCode and not a remote comparison of the deployed config on any given target server?
Right, okay. Well, you're right that when we show the comparisons by looking at the environments that we have within UrbanCode Deploy in here, we are looking at what UrbanCode Deploy knows it has deployed. Now, we also have mechanisms with WebSphere Application Server specifically with that technology for WAS or for WAS-ND, whereby we can harvest in and pull in the configuration of that particular WebSphere environment. We generate a whole host of XML files that will show all of the parameters and properties and the cell and the server and the node structure of that WAS configuration. We can then compare the real live system to the parameters that we took earlier on. So you can take effectively a master configuration, and then you can choose to compare the running system to that, say, 2 days later and see if it's changed. Now, that's where a lot of people go to look for sort of configuration drift. What I prefer to do, however, is to force changes to environments through UrbanCode Deploy. You start then being able to remove the ability of individual people within the organization to remotely log onto machines and make changes to them in the first place. A good example of that was a customer who told me the other day that he chose to change the WAS-ND admin console password, and he didn't tell anyone. And it was 2 months, would you believe it, before anybody asked him for the password, because all of the changes that they did were all being done through UrbanCode Deploy. So instead of going to the console itself to see what version of an actual application had been deployed, people were going to UrbanCode to look in their history to see what had been deployed. And that's a bit of a mindset change. You know, it's a bit of a cultural change that you might think might not be the easiest thing in the world. But it soon becomes apparent that that sort of thing can be done. So I hope that addresses that question, that the environment comparison is comparing what UrbanCode knows it has done successfully, but there are ways to harvest in and look at the configuration drift of a live WebSphere environment too. And as you can see, after a bit of a false start, our pesky deployment has now completed. So we've now deployed our pet store, and we can go back now to our system where it's running and refresh that and go into the pet store, and there we go. If anyone would like to buy a dog over the internet, then I'm your man. We can do it. So there you go, a bulldog turning up in the post. Any other questions to Jinder?
No, Mark, that was it.
Okay.
So
Super. Well, sorry, go on.
No, continue, sorry.
I was going to say we're slightly over time, so I'll thank you folks for sticking with us, and I hope it's been a useful session. What we've tried to show today really is how we can automate the deployment of the IBM middleware itself, automate the deployment of applications into that middleware, and that can be extended pretty much to any type of technology, and hopefully you can see how that could have an impact on your deployment processes. So if anyone needs any more help, I'm sure Tajinder will follow up afterwards, but get my details off Tajinder if you have any more questions, and we can try and address those for you. So thanks for your time, and I hope it's been a useful session for you.
Pete Jones has another question. He's just typing it.
Sure, no problem.
Second. What integration is there with LDAP?
Yes, LDAP integration. Entirely provided, very easy to set up. You basically go to your server, go into your server settings, and it's in authentication, and you create a new realm, and here you pick LDAP, single sign-on, or the internal storage. So you can set up a new LDAP there. Interestingly here, you can have as many of these security realms as you like. So if you have got multiple LDAPs because you're a particularly large organization, maybe from acquisitions and mergers, then that sort of thing shouldn't really be too much of an issue for us. Interestingly, on the security, I will just make an additional point that we have a way to set up teams, and we can allocate people to individual teams, and then within the teams, people take on a specific role, and that role they take on allows them to do certain things to certain parts of UrbanCode. So for example, here we have environments. Standard environments, I might let everyone do pretty much everything to create them and run them. When it gets to things like production environments, only a small subset of the people can run those. But pretty much everybody can see them and do the comparisons. It's always good to let people see what's in production and allow them to do the comparisons with it. So great, fine, very, very fine-grained control over the security profile and what people can do, and LDAP support too.
Okay, that seems to be it. Thank you for the great presentation, Mark. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and thanks for attending today's webcast.